just give it another minute or so before we get going. Super excited to be here and walk you guys through project communication tools and risk management. Oh, sorry, I just did that again. There we go. Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. All right, so I'll just give it a minute. Like I said, I'll hold all questions until the end. We'll reopen the chat and give you guys access to some stuff. So, but yeah, definitely excited. And so thank you all for joining again. I'm just going to give it another minute, and then we will jump into it. We've got a great presentation here. Very, very excited to walk you through some risk management. It's a presentation I gave earlier. Couldn't have gone over better. People were really, really excited about it, and they were really focused on risk management. And so that was kind of the interesting side of it. And so what we presented here really, really went over well. So I'm excited about that. Awesome. Yeah. Many, many folks are joining. So thank you all for joining on this Saturday. Just in the chat box, definitely let me know. I've got, and I'm going to show you coming up here, but I've got several Saturday sessions coming up. And people tend to like the Saturday sessions. It's still fairly early. Of course, we record them and we can do replays and whatnot, but live, I'll be Saturdays, and the next 3 or 4 Saturdays, I'll be live. So if you go off to that webinar page, plus I've got some special guests coming. I've got Dan Yeomans is going to come back, and Don Clark's going to come back. There's a number of people that are going to come back. So really, really excited about that. But we have spent enough time, so folks will continue to join. We've got a ton of people on already, so thank you all. And so let's get going. So my name is Bill Dow, and this is Project Management Communication Tools, a guide to risk management. So like I said, I have 27 years of hands-on experience. I've been at Microsoft for 12 plus years, AT&T Wireless for 5, Singular for 2, government of British Columbia for 9 years. I worked in the Bellevue College. I've been teaching locally at the college level since 2008. Constantly giving back, constantly giving webinars and speaking. I've been a speaker at several PMO symposiums, Project Summit World. I've been on the radio. MPUG, I got a presentation coming October 18th. PM podcast, I've been interviewed 3 times, and we're about to schedule our 4th. First-time author, PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down, Project Management Communication Tools, Tactical Guide for Building a PMO, and then back in 2008, my Bible book, Project Management Communication Bible. Definitely active on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you guys haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, definitely come connect with me. So we've got lots of connections, and my connections are your connections. So definitely connect up, and I can help you wherever way I can. So I just wanted to briefly give you my background, lots of experience, very, very passionate about this, and very excited to show you risk management today. So let's go over the agenda. We've got 5 major agenda items. We'll talk about major risk events. We'll talk about the purpose of risk management. We'll go over steps to effective risk management, which include project drivers and expected value. We'll talk about risk management methods and software. We'll briefly talk about software, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. Sound good? Excellent. And you guys, again, I can't really see the chat, but again, put all your questions or add the questions. There's a poll there, so I'd love to see your poll results as well. And then we'll fire up that offer stuff at the very end. Okay, so let's start with risk events. And really, we're going to go into a deep one here. So there's really an inherent uncertainty in every project we do, actually in everything we do, and therefore there's risks. Some good, some bad, some positive, some negative, right? I love this quote, but risks happen all the time, and we need to be prepared for it. I'm sure you guys agree. So let's look at a major risk event. Let me take it back to 1967. 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, Robert Chaffee. You can see them there. A horrific fire in the cabin. Sadly, we lost all 3 of the men. But I wanted to pull out this quote from Gus because I thought it was really important. And it says, if we die, we want people to accept it. We're in a risky business, and we hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life. So sadly, they did pass away. But very, very, very major risk event. Okay? So what caused that fire? So astronaut Frank Borman actually testified to the Senate, and there was two main things he said: failure of imagination, and we just didn't think of it. How true is that with risk management? We just didn't think of it. It comes up all the time, right? Hence why risk management is so important on our projects. Actually, in this particular case, there's been several root cause analysis done on the fire. And so I sourced it, so you can go and have a look at that source. Very, very interesting. 4 main points here. Number one, the ability to open the hatch quickly. The spacecraft hatch took 5 minutes to open. Okay. And we needed to be clear on the contractor expectations requirements. The insulation in the capsule defeated, or basically wasn't strong enough. We needed to limit the amount of flammable materials on board the ship. They actually had a high concentration of combustible materials in the cabin. And then finally, number 4, for this particular root analysis, reduce oxygen concentration for ground crews, and the cause was pure oxygen was used in the spacecraft. So again, this was a great example of a root cause analysis that possibly, if it was done earlier, and we say possibly because you just don't know, but possibly if it was done earlier, it could have prevented that tragedy. So very, very interesting, a major, major risk event, and something that really stresses the importance of how risks need to be managed on these efforts. So I strongly suggest you go and have a read of those. Very, very, very good information. So risks. Sometimes projects just don't do what you want them to do. Right? How true is that? And it's really a great definition of risk. So what are some of the reasons why we don't do risk management, right? What are just some of the common reasons? Fear, lack of control over risks, lack of commitment, lack of education or experience in the risk management process, and then avoidance of risks as well. So there's lots and lots and lots of reasons and why people don't do risk management. And sadly, it's why we have a lot of the problems that we have on our projects today. Project managers just don't put the rigor in place to do the proper level of risk management on their projects. And so that's a huge problem. Okay, so why do we do risk planning, right? Why is that so important? Well, I've really highlighted 10 main areas. It's in your best interest as a PM. It definitely gets everyone involved in the process. It allows you to document decisions. It gives stakeholders true expectations of the project. You understand the direction the project could take when you plan your risks. You definitely identify everyone's role. That's a major part of it. You document risks in scope, schedule, budget, and quality. And we got more about that coming up. But you look at the risks across those areas. You obtain team buy-in. It shows what could change, and it's great for lessons learned. And that list goes on and on and on, but these are some of the key thoughts. I'll just give you a minute to look at those. Yeah, very good list and stuff that we see on a regular basis. Okay, so let's spend the time now and look at the purpose, right? What's the purpose of risk management? Well, there's four key purposes: identification, appraisal, management, and the control of project risks. These are the four main purposes, right? And so what are the focus? So we want to reduce possible threats. We want to reduce any adverse outcomes, and we want to try to eliminate or lower potential litigation and safety issues. So think about the Apollo fire, right? Root cause analysis, like I say, possibly could have helped prevented that. No one's guaranteeing that, but possibly could have prevented that. So these are the four main purposes around risk management. So with the purposes, obviously there comes some steps, right? And so when you think about the steps, there's 7 main steps: planning, identification, qualitative analysis, quantitative, risk response planning, risk monitor and control, and project closeout and lessons learned. So these are the 7 main steps that will have you going through as you execute risk management on your processes. Seem familiar? Make sense? Pretty common, right? Industry standard. But again, very, very important for you to drive through and drive these 7 steps as you think about mature risk management on your projects. So let's look at them. Step 1, planning. The process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for your process. You're planning, right? You're planning on how you're going to do risk management. Why is it so important, right? I love this statement: to ensure the level, the visibility, and the type of risk management to be applied to the project is appropriate. I can't stress that enough, right? Having to apply the right level of risk management to the project. Could you overdo risk management? You certainly could. Could you underdo it or not put enough focus to it? Yeah, that happens all the time. So there's that balance. You need to ensure the level, the visibility, right, to the project is appropriate. And that's a great step that I think a lot of project managers miss in that planning process. Often what you see in the planning process is, let's get a risk log together and we're good to go, right? And we just need a lot more level of rigor to that. Okay, before we jump into step 2, the identification, let's look briefly at a definition. So project risk is the amount or level of uncertainty on a project. It's pretty standard. We're all familiar with that. It's not the sum or the average of all the risk events on the project. I think that's important too. A risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if occurs, has a positive or negative effect on the project objectives. So important, right? Positive or negative effect. And that makes a huge difference in really understanding what a risk is. All right. So let's do this. Let's jump to number 2, identification. The process is determining which risk events may affect the project and documenting those characteristics. You want to identify as many risk events that might occur during the life of the project. And this includes looking at the project management knowledge areas: scope, cost, quality, right? We mentioned that earlier. But having a look at those knowledge areas and understanding what possible risk events could occur across those knowledge areas is a critical part of the identification process. Okay. Qualitative risk analysis, step 3. The process of prioritizing risk for further analysis or action by assessing and combining their probability of occurrence and their impact, right? Probability and impact equals score. Probability times impact equals score. We see it all the time. Most project managers will default to this qualitative risk analysis. You'll use a risk impact form, risk impact probability matrix, right? We'll show you one of those coming up, and then a risk model. So lots of good tools you can use to help you do that qualitative risk analysis. But when you think about qualitative, just think about impact and probability, and then of course creating that score. Okay? And that's people are familiar with that. Most of the people use that. So let's look at quantitative, okay? So the process of numerically analyzing the effect of the identified risks on the project objectives. Process will associate time, budget, and schedule impacts to our risk events. This is where you really narrow in. You go, look at what's the time this risk could, what's the budget, what's the schedule that these risks impacts. So the main objectives, right, of quantitative risk analysis are to identify realistic and achievable cost, schedule, quality, determine the probability, quantify the risk exposure, determine the size of cost, and schedule contingency. Identify risk events, and I'll just give you a minute to look at those, but you use decision tree, you'll use a Monte Carlo simulation, use expected value, right? This is where you're really putting the meat to these risk events, and you're putting the scores, and you're really understanding how these will impact your projects if they do occur. So you can do probability impact, but this is that next level down to really understand your risk events. Is anyone doing quantitative risk analysis today? Just put a yes or no in the chat box. Okay. Karen, got it? Yeah? Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'm going to show you how. All right, and number 5 is risk response planning, the process of developing options and actions to enhance opportunities to reduce the threats to the project objectives. So a decision tree diagram and expert judgment, right? And so really what you're doing here is you're preparing to respond. What happens if this risk event occurs, right? A lot of times we don't think about our response planning. The big thing about risk management that many project managers do is get their risks on the risk log. Let's just get them on there. Let's get them on there. Let's get them on there. But risk management is such a complex task, and it really requires stepping back and assigning values, assigning scores, but also assigning what happens if the risk event occurs. What's our response? And so it's very important to put that in there. And again, if you look at a lot of risk logs, you won't see a lot of responses. You'll just see that people are trying to fill them up, but we often forget about that last part of the conversation. What happens if this occurs? Step 6, monitor and control. So important, right? So important. We're monitoring, controlling the risks as we execute through the project. So the major purpose of risk monitoring control is to answer the following questions. Have your risk response been implemented and planned? Are the risk response actions as effective as possible? Should new risk response be developed? Have a look at these questions. These questions are gold, right? These are the reasons that we do risk management. This helps us monitor and control. You can take a screenshot. I'm going to provide you the deck, so you don't have to put a screenshot, but you can if you want. But just think about these 8 questions. And there's probably 100 different questions out there. But I'm just going to give you a minute to look at those. I will give you access to the deck, so don't worry necessarily about a screenshot. But think about the gold that these questions trigger with you. Are the policies and procedures been followed? Has a trigger or warning occurred yet? Right? Is there new risks? Or so part of monitoring and controlling is identifying any new risks. What do you guys think? Can you see the value of these 8 questions and how you can apply it to monitoring and controlling? I think so. I think there's a lot there. And so something definitely to consider. Okay. And then finally, step 7 is the risk project closeout and lessons learned. And right, the purpose of the risk closeout is a verification of the risk plan and how well monitoring and controlling was performed. Another element is to make sure all portions of the project contract have been completed and closed with minimum litigation pending and all risk documents completed. Right, so risks still pending at closeout, warranties, liabilities, any liens, any ongoing litigations. And so you'll use a risk register and a lessons learned document. So I think this is a key component, right? When you're closing out a project, you've got to formally close out the risks on the project as well, right? Just the risk log just doesn't die and go away. I mean, again, as you're closing out the projects, you want to spend time and really focus on the risk events as well and closing those off. Make sense? Excellent. Okay, so one of the key components of risk management is understanding risk drivers. Project drivers, right? So think about how project drivers play an impact in the risk events, right? So what do we mean by project drivers? Well, the 3 main ones, right? Scope, schedule, budget. Triple constraints. Everyone's familiar with that. Very standard. I know we're starting to add business value. We're starting to add a lot of other components. I get that. But when it comes back down to the drivers and the constraints of a project, majority of the industry is still using these 3. Right? Obviously, you guys are familiar with those. I get that. Okay, now let's think about, though, how a risk event could have an impact on that driver. Right? It will affect at least one of the drivers, and not both, if not all 3. It will create a risk event. So let's think about this. Let's take a really simple example. Let's shorten our project schedule by a month. Okay, so your customer comes to you and says, okay, we need to release a month earlier. There's 10 possible risk events that could occur here. Increase the budget, overtime required, additional resources required. I won't drain it. I'll give you a minute to look at it. That's a lot of possible risks, right? And all they've said is, hey, we want to shorten our schedule. Again, we're not good at this. We're not good at looking at project drivers, and we've got to get a lot better at it. But we're not good at looking at project drivers and going, what are the possible risk events? More risk workshops, more visibility and discussions with our project team members. But hey, this scope just changed. What are the risk events? Cost just changed. What are the risk events? Schedule just changed. What are the risk events? And in this simple example, we've laid out 10 possible risk events. Does that make sense? Is any of you guys doing that? Are you guys looking at your all the different risk events based on a project driver? Just, again, put yes or no in the chat box. Yeah. It's tough, isn't it? Because you don't think about it. It's hard to think about how a project risk driver would impact all the risks. But now, with taking a little bit of this thought process, you can go back to your projects and go, okay, if we're having any changes or we've got, some suggestions on change in time or change in budget, I'm going to pull my team together and we're going to look at all the possible risk events. So important in that rigorous project or risk management that you take that approach. Do you guys like that? Make sense? You guys like that? Do you think that's a good idea? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, good. Excellent. Okay, so luckily, there's tools out there, right? Luckily, there's tools out there to help you with this whole risk management process. There's both tools and there's methods, okay? And so let's start with some of the popular ones, right? Expected value calculation, convergence, which is schedule convergence, and then the critical path method. And in that particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on and give you some points around why there's a problem with that, with using that method. So let's look at those. Let's look at these in detail. So expected value. How long does it take you to drive to work? Now, who doesn't deal with that subject on a regular basis? All right, so how long will it take you to drive to work? Okay, so let's look at our chart here. So when you're dealing with expected value, you're dealing with 3 different time frames: optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely. So optimistic, 45 minutes, pessimistic, 120 minutes, and most likely 60 minutes, right? So you guys seen those before, heard of those before? Is anyone using expected value at this point? Again, keep filling in the chat box. I've figured out a way I can actually see the chat. Okay. All right. So let's look at that. So what's the formula, right? So the expected monetary value formula is optimistic plus 4 times most likely plus pessimistic divided by 6. This is an industry standard formula using the PERT method calculation, and it's calculating the average. So really, when you think about expected value, it's all about the math, and it's all about this common industry standard calculation. Okay? So when you apply that to our how long does it take to drive to work, you've got 45 plus 4 times 60 plus 120 divided by 6 is 67.5. So what's that look like on our chart? About 7 minutes on average, 7.5 minutes on average over the average time. So 60 minutes was the average, or is the most likely. 67.5 minutes is your expected value. And that's it. That's the calculation. It's that simple. Okay. And so it's a matter of collecting optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely to gather the expected value. Have you guys seen that before? Just put a yes or no in the chat box. Okay, yeah, Dan says yeah. Okay, excellent. So are you using it though? Or is anyone actually using that on a regular basis? Okay, a little harder for me to see, but I can sort of see it. Okay, perfect. Well, I think you should. I think it's a very, very important calculation, something that as project managers, something we should be using on a regular basis. Now let's look at this convergence method. Now I won't drain the definition, please go look at it, but you've got 3 network paths: optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely. Again, you apply that same calculation. Will you finish on day 10? No, actually it's 11 days. So the expected value is 11 days. So again, this method works. It's all about, and I have a new article coming out, I've got new information coming out on this, on how do we gather this and why we're not using this. So more to come on optimistic, pessimistic, but this is something we should be using and something that will really help us with our estimates on how we deliver our projects. Because what's happening is most people are using the critical path method. And so what are some of the problems, right? It doesn't take risk into consideration. It's based on that single point. Near critical activities are not included. Ranges are neglected. Highest risk tasks may not be on critical path. Doesn't take convergence into consideration. So there's definitely some challenges, although lots of people use it, I get it, but there's some challenges on using the critical path method. And if you don't use the PERT method, the optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely, you're really missing out in that getting those more weighted averages and averages that will help you out more in the long run. So I wanted to raise it here because that's the exposure and people are using it. I wanted to give you exposure to it. But again, people, you have to look at some of the considerations and some of the problems with it. Okay. All right. So luckily we've got some risk management tools. And so what I want to do is spend a minute or two and just look at some of the tools that you should be using on your project. These are free tools. These tools, the next couple I'm going to show you are free, but these tools are just critical in delivering and staying on top of your risks. Well, clearly a risk register, a risk log, right? And this can be anything. The log doesn't matter what it looks like. Most PMOs, most companies have templates. The three things that you'll have in most cases are your probability, your impact, and your score. I think that's so important. And you guys are all using risk logs or risk registers today, right? Just put a yes or no in the chat box. Yeah, clearly, right? And that's great, and that's good, rigorous risk register or risk management. That's the starting point. But let me introduce to you the risk matrix. And what I love about this matrix is you're marrying the log and the matrix together. So your executives, your leadership, they're going to love the risk matrix, right? You got colors, you got, the greens, your yellows, your reds. Of course, what you're seeing, though, is you're seeing the ID of the risk. That's all you're seeing there. And then I just put a sample clearly. But you're going to marry these two together. You can run the risk matrix by itself, newsletters, status reports, dashboards for executives. They're absolutely going to love this risk matrix. Strongly suggest you use. But the great value of the risk matrix, because they're not going to get anything out of the IDs, is that log, that associated log. So somehow, some way, marry these two together. This is just, of course, a sample, but use a SharePoint site, use a web page, whatever you can do, a PowerPoint, whatever the case may be, but get these two worlds together. You definitely use a risk matrix by itself, right, in newspaper, newsletters, or status reports, or whatever, but somehow, some way, marry the two together. Are you guys doing that today? Do you guys like that concept? Do you guys like the risk matrix? Are you using a risk matrix today? Because it's a simple tool. Again, head back to, head over to the chat box and let me know. Okay, so now, so we've got the risk matrix. Love it. It's on the left-hand side. Pretty, red, yellows, and greens. Executives love that. You've got the risk log. It's a wonderful marrying the two together. Now what you're going to get, though, is a financial risk matrix. So what does that show you? Well, it's the same concept, but what you've done is you've calculated the expected monetary value, right? And so the expected monetary value is the actual budget you need to put away in case those risk events occur. So there's multiple risk events that sit in the high, or the high, medium, or high, low. And you can see that from your other log. So the financial risk matrix really gives you the dollars behind that. So if these multiple risk events occur, it's going to cost us $56,981. So get a risk matrix set up, get the IDs in there, and then create a financial risk matrix, because that's the next step in effective risk management, and actually the next step in really collecting and gathering that expected monetary value. So who today is actually calculating expected monetary value for the risk events? Again, just put a yes or no in the chat box. Yeah, so it's something that we don't often do, and it's that next step of risk management. If you're going to want to do and really have a good handle on your risks, you're going to want to put some dollars out there and some budget out there and saying, if this occurs, this is what will cost. If Joe, the developer, leaves us, to replace Joe as fast as possible will cost us X, or whatever the case may be, right? So very, very important to actually have a risk matrix just with the IDs and the log, but then go that next step and put that expected monetary value. Marrying those two worlds will really enhance how you do risk management on your projects, and will give your executives that feeling that you've got a handle on this. And they should know that there's budget and there's dollars associated to risk events occurring. And you've thought through that dollar process. What do you guys think? Do you guys like that? Just yes, no in the chat box. Okay, good. So one of the things that I wanted to show too as well today is I want to show you some of the software that's out there and how some of that software will work. And so there's tons. There are tons. Just go look at risk management or risk management software, Google it, Bing it, whatever the case. You're going to get Gold Sim, you're going to get At Risk, you're going to get Tamara, but there's tons of companies that are selling this risk simulation software. And what the simulation software in most cases does is the Monte Carlo analysis. So, and I'm going to show you here, but it's basically that's what it's doing. And it's going to give you that analysis of your schedule and your costs in most cases on how you're tracking on your project. Okay. So what are the odds of finishing on time, right? Well, let's do a little risk analysis, right? Let's simulate that software. So you've got a typical project schedule, right? Real simple. You've got minimum durations, most likely durations, and maximum durations. Optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely. Okay? So we've got all three of these, and what we're doing per task, we're filling this in. Now, have you guys seen that before? Have you guys done that at the task level? Using Primera or Primavera or MS Project or any of the project management tools? Just yes, no in the chat box, yeah. Or are you having these discussions with your team members? You're collecting these 3-point estimates. Oh, that's great. Yeah, if you are, that's wonderful. And if you do, and you collect it at the task level in a Microsoft project or a project schedule, and you buy this software, this is what you end up getting. You've got a probability of 0.5 all the way to 1.0, and it analyzes the heck. This is just 100 samples, but you can do 1,000, 2,000, whatever the case may be. But again, what this is doing is this is giving you the probability of you finishing on time. And if you do that task, if you do costs at the task level as well, in most cases, the software will give you the cost breakdown. This is an amazing tool. This risk simulation software is absolutely incredible, and it's something I strongly suggest you getting set up and using on your projects. But it's going to take you getting optimistic, pessimistic, most likely from your customers or from your team members, right? You're going to have to change your conversation to gather that information and then really get that into your scheduling tool so you've got a great feel for that. Now, again, because of some of the calculations, you can modify that. You can actually mock up. You can get a pessimistic or you can get a most likely or a optimistic, and you can do some calculations. I've seen that before. It's going to be part of my upcoming presentation or conversation. So watch for that, but you can mock that up. But really what you're doing and what the ask is here is to make this successful is you have to change your conversation with your team members. A single point estimate of 33.5% does not work. Your 33.5 and my 33.5 are completely different 33.5s. So again, you need to change your conversation around those three scores. It's going to be awkward to start, but eventually you'll get your team member. I've done it. You're going to get your team members thinking that way. And then you'll have the ability to plug this stuff in, and you're going to see a much more realistic aspect of when you'll deliver or not. So I absolutely love that. And I think that if you change that conversation, you start using this tool and this software, it's going to help you in the long run. All right, so let's summarize. Risk management is one of the most complicated aspects of managing your projects. I can't stress that enough, right? A lot of people fill in a risk log and they feel like they're doing risk management. We just took you through 7 steps to show you that that's not the case. Many project managers take this task lightly, right? They just do. But I say spend the time, actively track your project risks, and you'll deliver much more successful in your projects. The more effective you manage your risks, the less likely you have major project problems. We've seen that. We've proven that. Year over year after year, we have to step this up from a risk management perspective. Right? My name is Bill Dow. You can get me at billdow.publishingllc.com. Here's a couple of my books. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. And what I wanted to do today is I wanted to actually give you a discount coupon code. Here's where you can buy the book. And what I'll do is I'll stop this presentation. I'll open up the offers, open up for questions. And thank you all very much, very much. I appreciate you spending your time today. And hopefully you've learned a lot and give you some food for thought. I did want to put up my upcoming webinars. There's how to run a PMO. On 10/7, the PMO assessment inventory. 10/14, I got a special guest coming. 10/21, we'll do how to shut down a PMO. Definitely check out my webinar page, and I'll give you that link as well. But again, check out that webinar page to register for more webinars.